You didn't survive Treblinka day by day. You survived minute to minute. One wrong look, one unlucky step. One word too loud, and you were gone. For Yankiel Virnik, that moment came his very first night. He thought he was safe. He had slipped through the first selection. But that night, the SS randomly selected 100 men, including him. The others were machine-gunned behind the barracks. In Treblinka, death didn't follow rules. It followed you. To survive the camp, you first had to survive the arrival. Only about 1% did. The rest went straight to the gas chambers. More in the previous episode. Surviving the camp itself was just as cruel. Prisoners were judged every day, every hour. If you looked weak or idle for even a second, you were executed. In Auschwitz, selections followed a twisted logic. In Treblinka, it was mostly random. Still, there were some unwritten rules. Timing was crucial. The later you arrived, the better your chances. In the first weeks, the chance of survival was close to zero. The SS selected a few hundred men from the first train in the morning. They worked all day, and in the evening, they were shot at the mass graves. The next day, repeat. Only a handful survived that phase. Later, the odds improved. The Germans realized trained workers were more efficient. They created permanent labor squads, but guards still killed for sport. Richard Glazer recalls a drunk Ukrainian firing at a man sitting on a latrine. The man had done nothing wrong. He simply ran out of luck. In another case, Kurt Franz walked the camp with a shotgun. He saw a prisoner bent down while working and shot him in the backside. Then Franz examined the wounded man. He was disappointed the genitals were intact, so he went searching for another victim. At that stage, survival was still mostly luck. In late 1942, things changed. Transports were arriving daily by the thousands. Sadism had to give way to efficiency. The Germans began sparing reliable workers. Now, survival depended on where you worked. Those with the lowest chance were the nameless masses outdoors, dragging corpses from gas chambers, sorting belongings in the open yard. They were always visible, always exposed. One bad move, and the whip tore into your face. A wounded face was a mark, and Miete would finish the job. More experienced sorters worked inside barracks A and B. They could sometimes hide among the bundles or make tea in secret. But they needed luck too. One day, SS man Kiwi stormed into a barrack. He saw a sick worker leaning against a post. Kiwi declared the entire group lazy. That evening, all of them were forced to run around the roll call square. SS men whipped them without mercy. Dozens collapsed and were sent to the lazaret. Working inside gave them a better chance. But that day, it cost them their lives. They ran out of luck. Even specialists like the Goldjuden, who sorted valuables and were hard to replace, weren't safe. Ukrainian guards constantly harassed and blackmailed them for gold. Yankiel Virnik recalls, when the Germans found out, they executed half the Goldjuden. Not the Ukrainians, the Goldjuden. In this twisted world, no rule was ever certain. Foremen and capos had the highest chance of survival. They supervised other prisoners. During a typhus epidemic, they were allowed to recover in the infirmary. Ordinary prisoners had to keep working with 40-degree fevers and died in the hundreds. But even capos eventually ran out of luck. One day, bundles of clothing disappeared from sorting Barrack A. 2 workers had stolen them and traded with the Ukrainians. The capo and foreman were punished, sent to the worst job. dragging corpses in the Totenlager. Another capo, a giant named Rakowski, was a favorite of Kurt Franz, the most feared SS man in Treblinka. He was nearly untouchable, until Franz went on vacation. Another SS man did a random inspection. They found valuables on Rakowski. He was executed. Rivalries between SS men cost many lives. Here, survival was never earned. It was granted, and then taken away. For regular prisoners, even your looks could matter. Czech Jews noticed the SS beat less often those who resembled them. They stole boots and riding pants from the piles of murdered victims. Richard Glaser polished his shoes until he could see his own reflection. But looking too clean could also be suspicious. Those who resembled SS men too closely were often killed. Then came hunger. In winter 1943, transports briefly stopped. There were no new victims to loot for food. Prisoners had to survive on the tiny ration of bread from the kitchen. It wasn't enough. A black market, called speculation, started thriving. To survive, prisoners had to trade valuables with Ukrainians for extra food. Sometimes, instead of a Ukrainian, an SS man showed up at the meeting point. The result? Death. No matter how hard you tried, in the end, it was still just luck. Even among prisoners, danger came from within. The Totenlager, the extermination zone, always needed new labor. The SS kept pulling men from the lower camp to replace the dead. They forced capos to choose who would go. Often, it was the weakest, the friendless, or those who had angered someone in power. And then there was pure chaos. One night, a train arrived to collect clothes for Germany. SS men and Ukrainians formed a corridor between the train and the mountains of garments. It was a new situation. To assert dominance, they beat the running prisoners with full force. Franz's dog Barry lunged at them and tore at their genitals. That night, your looks or connections meant nothing, only luck. Another time, during roll call, the SS noticed 200 prisoners too many. In the early days, it wasn't uncommon for a few to sneak in with labor squads instead of going to the gas. Who doesn't belong here? Step forward, they ordered. 60 men confessed. They were spared. Then the SS randomly executed 140 others to correct the count. On any other day, honesty would have killed them. That night, honesty saved them. In Treblinka, there were no rules, just death, and whether it looked your way. By the spring of 1943, nearly 10,000 prisoners had passed through Treblinka as forced laborers. Yet at any given time, no more than 1,000 were still alive. Everyone understood what that meant. There was no surviving Treblinka. The prisoners called themselves corpses on leave. And slowly, a new idea began to form. If they couldn't survive, maybe they could fight. But that's a story for another time.